Good afternoon, everyone. I was talking with someone recently, and we were talking about ages and how we felt and that type of thing. And I said, well, I'm going to turn 85 in November, and I feel pretty good overall. I can still do everything that I did when I was 18 for about 15 seconds. I was reviewing my notes recently and noticed a message I gave on September 21st, 1996, just 4 days short of 26 years ago. It's hard to believe all that time has elapsed. I'd noticed an excerpt in a newspaper column referring to an article that had been written by a man named Nick Stennett, who at that time was with the University of Nebraska. And back then, before the advent of the internet, it was easy to cite different sources because the information would only be be heard by the local congregation. They didn't have to worry about, copyrights and this type of thing like we do today, because today there are a lot of restrictions since the messages go out on the internet and potentially have a vast audience who will listen to it. Consequently, some of the examples that I've used in the past I can't use anymore because I forgot to write down any reference material, so I can't reference the things that I've read. However, fortunately, with Wikipedia, our good old standby, and Google, I can sometimes backtrack and get information that they deemed important enough to print. So I was able to find Nick Stennett along with some updated information. The article that he had written was about the family. He listed 6 things that successful families had in common. And I had selected 2 questions associated with each of those points for a total of 12 questions, and I gave those as a test to the congregation to see how they would do. Well, Nick is now, according to the new information, at the University of Alabama, and he collaborated with another professor, Dr. John DeFran, who's also a professor at the University of University of Nebraska. And they updated that information, and it's changed somewhat, and the list is pretty much the same, except the questions have been expanded significantly. So I'm going to use my original format for the sake of time. I'm going to ask you 12 questions. I'll tell you what the statement is associated with that, and then I'll ask you a question. And it's going to be real easy. Back then, I had assigned points to each question, and then at the end, had them grade it, and it was very subjective. So today, all you have to do is write yes or no. I'm going to ask you the question, yes or no, or plus or minus, or however you want to do it. If it's not applicable, which in a number of cases that will be the case, just ignore it. Very simple. And I'd like you to think of this as something that's going to go by fairly rapidly. Don't spend a lot of time trying to analyze the questions, but just answer them spontaneously, whatever comes to mind right now, because that impression is probably going to be your honest response to it. And since you're the only one to see the results, because I'm not going to ask anyone for hands or anything like that, it's designed to be helpful to you. So here is the first quality successful families had in common. They spend a lot of time together working, playing, and eating without smothering each other. They structure their lifestyle to make the time together occur. This cuts across all ages, all categories of relationship. So you just pick whatever area is applicable to you. And if none of the questions apply, then just ignore it. So the question one associated with that point, are you satisfied? Are we satisfied with the amount of time we spend with our spouse, with our children, with our parents, or conversely, that they spend with us? Interesting question, interesting point. Somewhere before, and I can't cite the source for this, but I read that the average parent spends 23 seconds a day with their teenagers. Considering some of the things I put my parents through when I was a teenager, I think it would have been very generous of them to spend that much time with me. But nonetheless, I don't know where they got that statistic, but that's what they said. Well, maybe our parents were gone a lot because they had to work several jobs, in order to keep the family afloat financially. Or, absent a compelling reason such as that, maybe their time was spent with activities such as golf or yoga, football, basketball, you fill in the blanks, fishing, could have been any number of things. And I hope that you all understand, that we all understand, I'm not slamming any of those activities. There's nothing inherently wrong with any of them unless, of course, they are destroying the integrity of the family by removing the presence of the parent from the spouse or children. So, question 2. Is your family environment one that stifles growth, or do you feel stimulated? Does your family environment one that stifles growth, or do you feel stimulated? My dad and his family immigrated from Romania and settled near Regina, Saskatchewan in Canada. And 2 years later, when he was 14, he ran away from home and came to the States because a priest in the old country had planted a seed in his mind telling him that he needed to get an education. Now, I can remember many days when I would be helping my dad remove old growth stumps that were abounding on our little farm in Monroe, first drilling holes in them with an old auger that you had to turn by hand in order to make a hole to put sticks of dynamite in there to blow them apart. My mom referred to our farm as a stump ranch. And when we moved there, that's what it looked like. Dad, however, had a greater vision of the land and what the improvements would do. The thing that I enjoyed when I think back about that, I can see his muscular body sweating in the sun, sweat pouring down, and with an axe or a saw or whatever he was using to do the things to the stumps that we needed to do to take them out, telling me stories of the hard work he had had to do in order to survive in a new and strange country on his own, with no family to support him. He said, I don't want you to have to go through the hardship I did when I was your age. Anyway, I was always fascinated when he talked to me about the different jobs he had done in order to make a living and yet go to school at the same time. He'd done back-breaking work hauling sacks of potatoes, which he filled, out in the field, and then carrying them all bent over to the barn or storage facility where they'd be stored. He'd also tried selling pots and pans, wherever pots and pans, house to house. And I never got tired of hearing about the stories he told about the people that he met who were totally unsympathetic to what he was doing, and some of them chased him off. I'm here to tell you, he definitely stimulated me, and he did it in two ways by telling me these things. I didn't want to have to go through the things he did in order to go to college. But it also stimulated me in wanting to go to college so I could have the education to do something in the future. And I'd be prepared and educated to do it, and I'd have more options. So he stimulated me in that way. What about us? Do we as parents stimulate our children? And some of you, of course, don't have children, but for those of you that have children, do we as parents stimulate them? Do we stimulate the other people in our lives? Or do they secretly cringe when they see us coming because they know all they're going to hear is our hard luck stories about how life has done us wrong, like some country music that you hear? And if only our childhood had been different. If we'd married Pat instead of Sally, if we'd taken that job in Chicago instead of Alaska, and on ad infinitum. And we can fill in the blanks ourselves and maybe remember the latter part of Proverbs 3, verse 7. Proverbs 3, verse 7, where we're told there's a time to keep silence, or silent, if all we're going to do is inundate someone else with all of our problems. Conversely, if we're really excited about how God has taken an impossible hardship or trial in our life and turned it into a great blessing, and we want to share this with someone who needs to be stimulated or encouraged in a positive way, that, moving on to the last part of that verse, in verse 3, this is definitely a time to speak. So you have, in contrast, both of those, a time to keep silent, keep your mouth shut, zip it up, or a time to speak. Moving on, here is the second thing successful families have in common. They have a high degree of commitment to promote each other's welfare and happiness to the family as a group. Very, very committed to promote the other's welfare and happiness. So question 3, do you feel your family is loyal to all of its members? And in addition, are you? Do you feel your family is loyal to all its members, and are you? Proverbs 18, verse 24. Proverbs 18, verse 24 says, a man that hath friends must show himself friendly. Very, very simple, very succinct, to the point statements. If you want a friend, you've got to show yourself friendly. You know, we have to make the overture. In spite of what they do or don't do, we don't shut them out of our lives. And I'm talking about family, but that can apply across the board. And I was going to mention, if you don't have a physical family or someone, you know, that's close, some of these you could apply to your church family as well. You could just as well apply the principle to people in the church that you know. So think of that as you go through here. And the second part of verse 24, and it says, there's a friend that sticketh closer than a brother. You know, when you think about that, that is really sad. I mean, I know that's true, but if you think that there are people in the church that you're closer to than people in your own family, What's the disconnect there? Why is that? Now, if you're being persecuted because of your beliefs, that's another thing. You can't do anything about that, just be a good example. Question 4, do we consider all of our family and what we can do to promote their welfare? Not just the favorite aunt or uncle, not a relative that's been nice to you or someone that gives you gifts, but everyone. Sometimes there are single parents living by themselves who are separated from the rest of the family geographically. Do we reach out to support them? Do we call them, text them, send them letters, or visit them? Or if you're capable, and I really include myself in this, of using Zoom to get in touch with them. Some of us who are older, I think, would prefer anything else than using Zoom. Now, I'm speaking more to a younger audience, so you do this all the time, but, some of us shudder when we have to think of doing communication in that manner. Here's the third thing successful families have in common. They show a high degree of religious participation and are committed to a spiritual lifestyle. Well, this is like preaching to the choir. I mean, you all are aware of this. You all know this. The one thing I couldn't determine when I read this information was whether either of these persons, espoused any religion one way or the other. But I think it was apparent that that particular question had to be included, or statement. Going on, their religion is personal, practical, and not necessarily church affiliated. Well, there they go. And I've met people who will tell me, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. Now, I don't know exactly what that means, but I've never really bothered to get engaged in any kind of a discussion about it. I remember a lady telling me that she and her husband went to the cowboy church. And I didn't even know there was a cowboy church where everyone dressed as cowboys attended, and that's, no suits, no casual clothes, just boots, spurs, Levi's, and, a Stetson. But anyway, that's the statement that they have in common. They're people that have some kind of a belief, be it religious or spiritual, as they would define it. I think we've all met people who we can say, they're good people. They're not in the church, but they do good. They're law-abiding insofar as the laws of the country are concerned. They have a certain morality. As far as we know, they're being loyal to their spouses. They don't cheat on their income tax or any other thing. And they are people that undoubtedly, when God's truth is revealed to them, when he sees fit to reveal it, they'll wholeheartedly and without reservation, accept it. Because their basic background will understand or be able to absorb that. Question 5, do we as a family talk together? Do we as a family talk together? Luke 24, verse 14. Luke 24, verse 14. And here, in the chronology of what you're reading, this is after Christ had been resurrected and had shown himself and discussed things with his disciples, some individually, some by groups, and some all together. And it said here, they talked together of all these things which had happened. They communed with each other. Do we do that with our families? Do we understand what's going on in their lives? You have to talk. You have to have a discussion. You have to listen if that's going to happen. Becky Sweat wrote an excellent article in the recent Beyond Today issue on page 20 entitled, How to Talk to Your Children About Frightening World Events. You know, children today are bombarded with TV news and internet articles, and they live in a world where they're exposed to graphic images of crimes, war, or other explicit images in the news. You know, just recently our news has been filled with a number of sensational and or mass killings that have taken place in our country. One of those touched pretty close to me. A few months ago, in early June, 2 doctors, a receptionist, and a visitor were killed in a Tulsa, Oklahoma hospital shooting. I was shocked when I heard the name of one of the doctors, Dr. Preston Phillips. And when I checked the internet for details, his picture was there, and I immediately recognized him. He had been my back surgeon 19 years ago on September 30th, 2003, so almost the 19-year anniversary, when we were supposed to be flying to Russia to keep the feast. Instead, I was in Swedish hospital having a 7-hour back surgery. You know, I was a little than more apprehensive about the surgery at first, especially after signing the laundry list outlining all of the things that could occur during that surgery, including death. Dr. Phillips was an African American who had graduated from Harvard Medical School and had a list of other very impressive credentials. I was pretty sure I would be in good hands, especially after several of the nurses I talked to in the hospital volunteered this information to me. They said, you don't have to worry because he has a reputation for 2 things, cleanliness and preparation. And that sounded good to me. When he told me I wouldn't be able to drive for 3 months, I was concerned because at that time I was hosting a jazz radio program on KBCS every Saturday night and Sunday morning. When I told him that, he smiled and he said, you know, I did the same thing when I was in college. And he even volunteered to do it for me. As it turned out, I was able to get a sub, but we had established an immediate rapport and connection. When I had recovered from the surgery and was back on the air, I invited him to come down some evening. And I said, you can select your own music, do your own program, do as much as you want to. So one night he called and asked if that night would be a good night to come because he wanted to surprise his wife. I don't remember, I think it was an anniversary. And he wanted to dedicate a song to her, but wanted to make sure she would be awake so she could hear it. Anyway, when he moved away, we kept in touch, so I guess you can understand why I was shocked at this shooting. I listened to the memorial service. I didn't realize it was on the internet, and I just saw it last week. 2.5 hours long, but a lot of that was filled with music and, you know, viewing and that type of thing. And one of the things that was very clear from the people who were there and the people that talked, including his 3 children, they were all adults, a son and 2 daughters, how close that family was and how much he had done for the family as well as the other people in the community. Well, do we discuss things like this with our children? I mean, we don't have things like that happen every day where we're dramatically affected. Well, and this isn't meant to be a spoiler, but consider it a strong suggestion, especially if you have children, to read that article. There used to be a statement on a radio program that ended with the slogan, and I don't remember what the program was, it's been a long time ago, but it was this: the family that prays together stays together. And it was well known. You know, you could just as easily say the family that talks together walks together, because you establish that closeness, that friendship, that ability to talk about things that are personal, that are going on in your life. And Amos 3:3 says, you know, can we walk together, or can you walk together unless you be agreed? And the reality is it's very difficult to walk with someone if you don't agree with them, if they're going this direction and you're headed this direction. Well, question 6, do we promote the practical aspects of Christianity? Do we promote the practical aspects? Do we show how it works by doing to others what we would like returned to us? Matthew 22, verse 35. Matthew 22, verse 35. Then one of them, which was a lawyer, asked him a question, tempting him. You know, the lawyer wasn't really looking for the truth. He was trying to trip him up. And saying, Master, which is the great commandment in the law? And Jesus said unto him, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like unto it, Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these 2 commandments hang all the law and the prophets. So everything in the Bible cascades down for those 2 basic principles. You know, I don't care what it is, it somehow relates back to those 2 principles. And Brandon did a very good job of introducing that himself. So, and we didn't, either one of us, know what we were going to be speaking about. So I guess you know what the influence is when that happens, or where it comes from. Anyway, are we able to point out specific examples in our own lives how being a Christian has been beneficial to us? You know, I'm sure that most of us here today who've been in God's church for a number of years could give examples of how God has blessed us. And that even in spite of how bleak and desperate certain trials we've experienced may have looked on at the onset, we all should be able to come up with examples. And I think that all of us could say just the blessing of being called in the first place is, to me, one of the greatest blessings that I feel I've had, and what that entails. It's that peace of mind that does surpass all understanding, as enunciated by Paul in Philippians 4, verse 7. It is what assures us and makes us certain of the future which lies ahead. In the recent Beyond Today magazine on page 23, one column of a brief article is tucked away on the last column of the page. The lead or the intro is U.S. belief in God and the Bible at record low. And there are a number of percentages and figures cited supporting that statement. And maybe you've read them, but this one caught my eye. Quote, a record low 20% now say the Bible is the literal word of God. And that apparently is 50% of what it used to be in the 1980s. Then it was 40%. And if you project that trend out into the future, I don't have to tell you what the consequences of that may be somewhere down the line, when we may no longer have the protection that current laws give us for getting time off from our jobs or time off of, out of school to be able to go to the feast, being excused to do that. Now, I'm not saying that that particular thing will happen, but I don't think anyone can categorically say that it won't. Because when people start changing the laws, you never know what they're going to be tinkering with. Here is the fourth thing successful families have in common. They have a special ability to deal with tragedies and crises. They offer strong support to the one in crisis as well as each other. Do our families do that? Question 7, does your family join forces when something unpleasant happens? Or are there some that say, we told you so? You should have known better. You shouldn't have married her. You shouldn't have married him. You shouldn't have taken that job. What were you thinking? And rather than say, well, you made a mistake, so let's move on, and we're here to support you. Luke 15, verse 25. Luke 15, verse 25. And this is the example of the prodigal son. And I'm just going to start with the latter part of the story because you all know it very well. Now his elder son was in the field, the father's elder son. And as he came and drew nigh to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. Verse 25 of Luke 15. And he said unto him, thy brother is come, and thy father hath killed the fatted calf, because he hath received him safe and sound. And the elder brother was angry and would not go in. He sat out on the steps and pouted and fuming about what was going on. Therefore came his father out and entreated him. His father came out and said, your son or your brother has wasted his inheritance. He took a third of what I have. The other 2/3, as the oldest son who got a double portion, is yours. Your son's not going to get anything else. Your brother's not going to get anything else. We'll give him a place to sleep. His old room in our house, that's not costing us anything. Another person sitting at the table for a meal is insignificant. But we're going to give him a chance to rebuild his life. But he's going to have to prove himself. Maybe we'll give him a job if there's something that he'd be good at, or, this type of thing. But it'll be up to him. Maybe he'll be able to earn back what he lost. Who knows? It's not that important. He's back safe and sound. I had a dog that I just loved, a little black and white dog. I'm about the 7th or 8th grade. And the dog disappeared one day. And every night I remember coming home on the school bus looking for that little dog. And that went on for years. Literally, I would wake up and I'd think, I wonder if that dog's ever going to come back. Well, he never did. But I thought of my love for that dog and how if you translate that to a son or a daughter who has been out there and made a mistake and comes back home, how exciting is that? And what would you give to have that happen instead of seeing their picture on a milk carton, as they've taken these enhanced pictures of what they were like when they were 3, and now they're 20, to see if they can find them. And I often look at those and wonder what the percentage is. But anyway, is your family loving and kind and forgiving? I think we answered that pretty much in the previous question. Number 5, they take time to talk together and to listen to each other. They do fight, have arguments and quarrels and conflicts, but are free to express their feelings. They look at alternatives to use in resolving conflicts. Question 9, how adept are you at listening to your family members or they to you? We shouldn't always be on guard like this. Every time you talk to your wife, your mind should remember that this conversation will be recorded for training and quality purposes. We don't or shouldn't go into a conversation like that with our spouse. It should be objective, unbiased, looking for a peaceful solution to whatever issue is up for discussion. I shouldn't approach a conversation with Veronica thinking about that, because she's very capable of dredging up things 20, 30, and 40 years ago, because she has a unique capacity and her memory is very sharp. So I never try to do that with her. We need to put aside any bias or prejudice and approach our discussion with as much objectivity as possible. Some families never fight, but the issues never get addressed or resolved. They're just swept under the rug. Question 10, are we able to talk about sensitive issues and discuss them even if there is disagreement? If that is the case, are we able to remember and use the example in the following verse, which is a principle we never want to forget, and that's Ephesians 4, verse 26. Ephesians 4, verse 26. Be angry and sin not. This is a fine balance, but let not the sun go down upon your wrath. Get a good night's sleep. Start the next day fresh. Don't hold something against someone else and let it gnaw on you. Unfortunately, that's the reason many people don't engage and express their real feelings in a discussion, because they're fearful of the repercussions and how they'll be viewed after they've expressed what is really on their mind. Finally, 6, successful families express appreciation to each other. They give a lot of positive messages and sincere compliments. Question 11, how often do we compliment our children, our spouse, our parents? When was the last time you said to your mom, hey, Mom, that was a great dinner you prepared tonight. I really liked it. Or you said to your spouse, how nice, they told them how nice they looked. And you weren't referring just to their clothes, but to their attitude, to their warmth, to their affection when you walked through the door at night. Veronica gets an A+ on this because she always seems to know intuitively the things to say to our children or grandchildren or me, and how to compliment us so we feel good about ourselves. Final question, question 12. How many positive messages do we give or receive? Many, a few, or none? What about our eye contact? Do we always glare at our children so they're wondering, what did I do today? We used to have a small dog named Monty who was a great companion for us. He did tend to be a little sensitive, and sometimes I'd play with him, and I'd get down on all fours, and I'd stare him right in his eye, eyeball to eyeball, and he couldn't hold that gaze very long. He'd have to turn away. And he was probably thinking, what have I done now? Well, when we look at someone that way, all it does is invite confrontation. So we need to be careful about how we view others. And when someone looks at us in that way, analyze why. Well, I hope you don't think I beat you up too badly with this test, because all these questions were directed to me as well. I work on things just as we all do. But we all can improve, and we need to be reminded of these areas of our lives every so often and time to time to help prod us into taking action in our lives. Just as so we don't become forgetful hearers of the word, but remember and improve our ability to become expert doers of the word as well. The fall holy days are just around the corner, leading up to and culminating in the feast. This is always a great time for our families. It's especially a great time to work on our family relationships when we can all be together. Regardless of how you did on this test, there's always room for improvement. If we feel we've fallen short in any area, then resolve to use the upcoming feast to hone your skills, and if you do, I'll guarantee you, you will have the best feast ever.